Alright, well, I know a lot of you guys have been waiting for this, but I got my hands on Warhammer Chaosbane, maybe the first hack-and-slash action RPG to ever grace the hallowed halls of Warhammer Fantasy. And there is a lot to talk about, so let's jump right in. Last week, I played the closed beta as a Launtier, a high elf mage doing his thing during the Great War against Chaos, working hand in hand with your boy Teclis, High Lore Master of the White Tower of Hoeth. We know him well from Warhammer 2, but his balls appear to have dropped in Chaosbane.
There is grim news from the tower.
Grim news indeed. It's not every day the most important city in northern Kislev falls to chaos, and as usual, it's going to be up to us to plunge into the thick of it and send the ruinous powers back into the abyss from whence they came. And the High Elf Mage is certainly equipped to do so. First couple missions are maybe a little bit boring when you're only fighting basic enemies like Nurglings and Cultists, and only have a handful of spells unlocked. Once you start leveling up and unlocking more powers, and the big boys start coming out to play, the experience really starts to pick up and come into its own. Because there's a lot to do here. A lot of spells to wield, enemies to slay, princesses to please, and things can get overwhelming very quickly. And that is where Chaosbane is at its most enjoyable. When you're being overrun, and the winds of magic are the only thing standing between you and a brutal death. And as a high elf mage who earned the trust of the Empire, fighting alongside Magnus the Pious, Launtier has some pretty cool toolkit at his disposal. He's got 3 basic skills: Action Missile, Arcane Hail, and Phantom Blade. These are your simple, everyday spells for dealing with single enemies and weaving in between your bigger, more flashier attacks. The 9 advanced skills are a lot more stylish, ranging from a teleport ability called Step Between Worlds to a wall of flame known as the Phoenix Bulwark. And each of these are unlocked at a certain level, but can be upgraded for better damage and visuals through skill points. It is a really dense skill tree, just a ton of content there to unlock and mess around with, and the correct combination of these abilities is where the skill curve is really going to come in, because you can set up some pretty devastating wave clear, and quite a few of these spells have synergy that together equal way more than the sum of their parts. There's a lot of visual customization too, which frankly, I think a game like this needs, so definitely nice to see that made a priority. Mage Blades of Kalador, Boots and Tunics of Nagaraith, Staffs of Safari, there are plenty of nods to Warhammer lore, and they actually have functional application too, changing your stats and allowing you a little bit of leeway in terms of tailoring your gameplay. I don't have anywhere near enough time with the game yet to know how deep or nuanced customization actually is yet, but from what I've seen so far, it looks pretty decent. My biggest regret so far is that I didn't get to play any co-op. I tried really hard to find people to play with, I really did, but all the other YouTubers abandoned me in my hour of need, and queuing did not work, I imagine simply because the player base was so small for the closed beta. But after playing a couple hours of single player, I can guarantee you Chaosbane will be a lot more fun with a group of friends. I don't think solo play is bad, but it is not the game's strong suit. This is absolutely an experience that is best with some beers, some Cheeto fingers, and a bunch of your idiot friends all ripping and tearing together in the same lobby. I think single player loses out on the teamwork and communication that will make co-op the go-to experience, but obviously some people will prefer to play solo, and it's good to have options, so to have that here is perfectly fine, and undoubtedly some people will definitely prefer that. Enemy variety seems like it's going to be one of the best points of the game. The levels in the first act are all Nurgle themed, culminating in a boss fight with a Great Unclean One, but each of the Chaos Gods are represented, and so are the Beastmen. We've got Plague Bears, we've got Bloodletters, Ungors, Chaos Sorcerers, Cultists, Fleshhounds of Khorne, and I believe even a Keeper of Secrets has been unveiled. Nurglings will group together to form Voltron and run at you, turning into these little spinning cyclones of wriggling death as they scurry towards you. Chaos Spawn will slam the ground as tentacles erupt from the earth, and each enemy has a pretty obvious pattern or weakness that you can exploit and try to take out. And so 1v1, you're not going to have trouble taking down anything, but when all of it combines together and all rushes you at the same time, that's where things can get very tricky and pretty challenging. I only played on hard. I didn't get any higher than that. In fact, I don't think the beta even allowed you to get higher than hard difficulty, but it could get pretty brutal. I think at the most legendary difficulty, things are going to be real mean, especially if you're playing solo. One thing I have not seen yet is how much the gameplay scales in terms of when you're playing co-op. So what you'd like to see, of course, is that if you're playing single player, there will be less enemies, they'll have less HP so you can deal with it better. But if you get in a group with, say, 4 other people, suddenly get a massive amount of enemies all coming at you at once. But have not seen exactly how that's balanced yet. I think that co-op is going to be one of those game modes where things are going to have to get really crazy if they want you to be challenged. But like I said, there are definitely patterns for you to exploit as a player, and it can make for some really epic and memorable plays when you do. For example, Nurgle demons seem to be weak to arcane fire and lightning, and Chaosbane telegraph their attacks when they summon their tentacles, so you have a chance to walk between worlds, then stun lock them with bolts of energy. All told, there are more than 70 enemy types, all with their own archetypes and attack patterns, so when you include unique bosses and sub-bosses like the Mutilated Vortex Beast and Jabberslythe, who somehow made it into the game despite the obscene amount of Charlemagnes that model must have cost, I don't think the combat itself will get boring anytime soon. But in the beta I played, the game is still pretty rough around the edges and lacking some of the polish of some higher budget studios. Not surprising really, but I'd be remiss if I didn't mention some of these issues. So, pathfinding is kind of weak at the moment. There were a few times where I gave a movement order to move upstairs or skirt around an obstacle, and my knife-eared friend would run straight into the obstacle and stop, continuing to try to run into that wall instead of by himself moving around to where I clicked. I essentially had to path him out myself to get him unstuck, which is really annoying and wonky and something you don't really want to have to do in terms of character control when you're worried about all the enemies that are on screen. And there were quite a few times where an enemy was trying to attack me and would end up sprinting adjacent to a wall and trying to hit me through a solid object or that wall, whether from range or melee. So I would be completely behind cover and they would still try to hit me. So that kind of stuff definitely needs touching up for sure. Visually, this game looks kind of old. It does. There's no getting around it. The spell effects are very cool and get more and more badass as you level them up, but graphically, it doesn't really feel like a 2019 game. In a lot of ways, this isn't a bad thing because the gameplay and visuals are, I think, intended to get those nostalgia juices flowing and harken back to series like Diablo. And so I think to an extent, it's almost meant to feel a little dated, but I don't know. I take it for what it is, and with the understanding that this is not a big budget AAA title, visually, I don't think it's stunning in any way, shape, or form. The actual map design, pretty interesting, and there are definitely some good ones there, but texture quality and graphical fidelity in general definitely feel a little bit old. And the voice acting is, well, I don't really know how to say it except for pretty damn cheesy. Not that Warhammer isn't cheesy, it's always been over the top and grimderp in its own special way, but I'm not entirely sold on the voice acting here, and I'm not sure the way they handled it was the way to go. I mean, it's hilarious, but in a game where story and atmosphere are really going to be important, especially if you decide to play single player, I really don't know how much it will do in terms of immersing you in the setting. But take a listen and decide for yourself.
You saved my life, thank you!
They took them. Anyone still able to walk dragged them, screaming, into the darkness. Forget about me. Find the others.
Nurgle rot, you elf! May the Lord of Pestilence turn your guts to slime!
So yeah, maybe not top tier voice acting, but I think they are trying to ham it up a bit, and okay, if that's the approach you want to go for, sure. Curious what you guys think about that. But I guess the big question is the game fun? And the answer is yes. Especially in a group of like-minded Warhammer action RPG enthusiasts, I think you're gonna have a blast, and there's a lot of content there. I can't speak to replayability yet. Obviously, I just don't have enough time with the game, and the beta didn't have all the game modes anyway, but if it's supported well, I can see it having a pretty long tail life cycle. From what I understand, the campaign is pretty long, and there are a bunch of side dungeons and extra game modes like the boss gauntlet that should really help flesh it out and make the entire experience a better one. Again, the Warhammer world is a perfect canvas for a video game. There's just an assload of unique locations and important characters and, 9,000 years worth of lore to draw from? So if they wanted to, they could get an area on the Defender and go all the way back to the beginning invasion of Chaos. And even in the base game, we're going to be getting to see like the Nolan sewers overrun by Nurgle, snowy mountain realms invaded by Khorne, the remnants of Prague after Big Daddy Kolek smashed down the walls and let Azavar Kul and the Everchosen's buddies all sack Kislev. And that lore is a great way to immerse you in the setting, as is the introduction to Magnus the Pious we got in the first act. So there are a lot of nods, and it seems like it's a labor of love for the devs that are working on this game, and they certainly seem to know the locations and the lore of Warhammer pretty well, and you want your devs, if they're working on a Warhammer game, to love the setting and do it the justice it deserves, and it definitely feels like the devs are taking those steps, which is really important. So this is a beta. The game is coming out June 4th. They've got plenty of time to address the bells and whistles that will really polish out the experience and make it a better one. No idea if they will. There are issues that need to be addressed, and I have no idea how they're going to tackle those. But at the moment, it is far from being the best Warhammer game I've ever played. With that said, it's also pretty hard to compare because I've never played a Warhammer game quite like this one. The gameplay is fun, maybe even addictive for some people, and you have tons of room for customization and growing your character, and if you just want to kill hordes of demons with your buddies, I think Warhammer Chaosbane will certainly scratch that itch. And that's before I've even gotten a chance to play as the Wood Elf Waywatcher or the Dwarf Slayer, who are going to bring their own dynamic and gameplay elements into the fold. So lots of room for expanding the character roster, and I think the future looks bright for action RPGs in the Warhammer universe. So let me know what you think of Warhammer Chaosbane from the gameplay you've seen so far, and I'll see you in the next video. Indie Pride, signing out for now. Have a good one, guys.